I would love to introduce you to the audience. I would say there are people who dedicated their life to become a trainer, a better trainer. And then there are people who dedicated their lives to understanding why horses think, feel, learn, react. And for decades, Steve's passion has been understanding how the brain works. This curiosity led him to spend much of his life studying the equine brain, neuroscience, behavior, and learning, asking not what we think is happening inside the horse, but what is actually really happening. And out of this came horse brain science, dedicated to understand horses through neuroscience and evidence rather than what we think is happening. And I personally believe this knowledge is not just valuable, but essential for anyone who lives with horses, trains, or loves, owns horses. Because understanding changes everything. It changes how safe horses feel, it changes trust, it changes welfare, it changes relationships, and it changes us, I would say. Today, Steve teaches around the world, has written several books, including a recent Amazon bestseller. Congratulations to that. And you share incredible, complex topics in a way that feels practical, understandable, and deeply human. And what really impresses me most, Steve, is personally it's not only your knowledge, but also your passion, your curiosity, and how approachable you are despite everything you have accomplished and everything you have to say. So, Steve, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to this conversation to share knowledge across the world. So very welcome and already sorry for my accent. I moved here 2 years ago from Switzerland to the States, and sometimes I'm missing some words, but I try to describe things around.
Your English is excellent, and also your uh, caring for horses is also evident. Um, as you mentioned, uh, my my lifetime study, and my career has been spent around understanding brains and the nervous system. And horses are mammals, just like we are, and therefore I became extremely interested in horses' nervous systems. That's the lens I saw them through because not only was my day job assessing brain functioning in humans and occasionally doing human brain dissection, I understood the horse through that neurological lens. So I wanted to find out what was similar and what was different in the horses' brains. I began to dissect out horse brains. I really had no plan to to disseminate the information widely. I was working mostly out of my own curiosity. And so I worked with a cowboy for almost a decade, Martin Black, um, and he has seen thousands of horses. So he helped me with the empirical evidence. Empirical evidence in the scientific process is basically observations, but clinical observations. We had a different language, though. I might say the trigeminal nerve, the facial nerve may be activated right now. Do you see it, Martin? He say, "Oh, I always see that guitar string thing that pops up on the face." So the language was different, but our observations were similar. And then when we realized that there was a huge hunger for something different, something that people could feel was legitimate, evidence-based, that wasn't a method or techniques, but basically understanding the horse from their nervous system, we decided to write the book, Evidence-Based Horsemanship. So that happened, 12 or 15 years ago. Uh, Over that time, I've continued to uh, give horse brain science clinics. This was largely the demand from the public. People said, "You need to come talk to us about the horse." And I asked big universities, veterinarian programs, I said, people are asking me, about neuroendocrinology and neuroscience. And they said, well, it's over their head. If you talk to them about that, they'll never understand. You might have one person in your audience who's really science oriented, but nobody else wants to know this. But I didn't agree because every day of my life, or at least my professional life, I would explain very complicated medical diagnosis to my patients so they could understand what was going on with them. And so it was an easy translation for me to the public. And I don't know that I was prepared for how warmly I was embraced, on how hungry people were to better understand their horses, to connect with their horses, to have a relationship with their horses, and ultimately do what's in the best interest of the horse welfare. So I've been overwhelmed by where I am today.
Well, I'm glad you're overwhelmed because I think everybody needs to hear what you have to say. I'm glad you're busy. Otherwise, I wouldn't understand it. So thank you so much for introducing yourself. I have a couple of things I would love to talk about. And the first thing is the synchronization and the inner energy. In my work with horses and when I teach my students Liberty, for example, um, for me, Liberty plays a really important role in teaching horses and teaching people because they really learn a deeper form of communication, the communication itself and self-awareness and everything. At the end of my journey or students' journey, I really, really would love them to communicate less through obvious external cues. In the beginning, those are as a part as well, voice commands, gestures, or tools. But at the end, I really, really drive for them to communicate more through the body language, the presence, and what I kind of call the inner energy. When I say inner energy, I really don't mean in a mystical way. When you think it, your body, your inner energy does it, right? The natural, the intention, your posture, your focus, your energy from your belly button. And I feel a profound difference. A horse performing a learned behavior, like a conditioned trick, and a horse that is truly synchronized with the human, both at liberty and on their saddle. The synchronization, I often feel that the horse, when I do that, feels safer, way more connected to me, and more mentally involved. For example, when I work at Liberty, the horse is circling around me. When I have taught the horse that as a trick, I kind of feel the horse is tuned out and just does it as a trick. But when I feel that we are synchronizing each other, I can influence speed. I can say more or less speed. I can say more or less spend. And I can work with the size of the circle. And the horse is always focused in here and ready to change something. It just feels like a dance. But when behavior exists only as conditioned, I can really feel robotic. And this really fascinates me deeply to work that way as a goal. It's not in the process, it's not always like this, but at the end. And I would really love to know from an evidence-based perspective, what do you think is happening during this kind of synchronizing interaction?
This is a wonderful topic. Actually, one question that I wish might have been asked to me in another podcast. Um, we're talking about the nervous system, and sometimes it because our language isn't so precise, so we can create a narrative about what we're thinking, we're seeing, you know. But you're right, it's not special waves and it's not mystical, although it may feel like that when you have good synchronous contact with your horse. But consider this. When horses are first born, unlike us, they are hardwired to be on their feet and begin to move. And as they move, their brain wires and connects along the whole motor system. So even before thinking ever occurs in the horse's brain, movement is already starting to materialize. And we are wiring, there's a process called myelination, so that once a neuron fires, it excites processes in the brain to go wrap uh, that wiring, that neuron together. And that makes movement smooth and fast. So very quickly, that horse is up on its feet, that colt or foal, and moving with mother. And that synchronicity in the motor system and the sensory system is built in. That actually is the horse's language. And so when you see horses moving in a group, look at how many have the same footfall. And almost like a flock of birds, one horse doesn't say, well, okay, three more steps, two more steps, one more step, let's all turn, right? They all move together and they're comfortable moving together. What happens is it's a collective nervous system. That's why they're herd animals. There's a collective nervous system. And in that collection, they have a neurochemical that allows them to bond in that connection called oxytocin. Oxytocin is also related to trust and bonding. When they're moving together and they have emotional balance, they have another neurochemical that's taking place in their system called serotonin that's related to emotional balance. So, when we are riding our horse or moving with our horse in that dance that you describe, the horse naturally feels much better, emotionally balanced, if we can get in synchrony with them, because that's a language that they understand. In fact, if you're a rider and you throw your horse off balance, you will see how quickly aroused they get. Also, if your timing is poor, you'll see the horse just keep trying and trying and trying to get in synchrony with the person. But the person has to listen and their body has to respond to get into that synchrony. That's why your timing with cues becomes important. That rhythm becomes important because if you're drilling your horse, what happens is you're the one in charge and the horse is constantly following, trying to find that synchrony. But if you're reading your horse at the same time they're reading you, which they do, then that's a dialogue. Then that's a dance, no longer just a monologue. If you drill, drill, drill in a monologue, what happens is they become robotic. The magic leaves. They move, but you know they're not moving in the same synchrony. They don't feel free enough and they feel better and you feel better. That's why a lot of psychotherapies for humans actually involve movement, especially those that have been traumatized. Movement is much more powerful than words. Sometimes words are counterproductive and it can actually create more trauma. So when the cue becomes less important than the shared timing, and when it becomes a dance, that's why people call it mystical. That's why people uh, believe that it's telepathic. But it's actually a very fascinating nervous system that has such sensory and motor sensitivities that if we attune with that and we can understand that language, that makes the horse feel safer because it's predictable, because it feels good and it feels right and it feels natural. But we have to be attuned to that to be able to bring that out of our horse. So that's basically the science behind it. It's not mystical, even though it feels that way. But that is built into our horse. So if we choose to understand that about our horse. And if we choose to allow our horse to speak in sensory terms and motor terms and listen to that and attune ourselves with that and get our timing together with that, that's when the horse shows up and it feels magic.
Mhm. Now you're gonna feel the highest state is also when the horse is offering something that you can kind of make it to your idea and kind of say, I go with you as well. So it's kind of like a dialogue at the end. And it's a really, really long journey for people to learn that. But I think it's the most beautiful, beautiful way to go instead of just, you know, your hands out is for forward or your language trot is for trotting. People can do that easily, but really know what's going inside and have a good body feeling and reading and learning. It's a longer journey, but I think a really beautiful one and
You have
really
to both
interesting.
allow yourselves to feel safe and free.
Right.
Because a
Yeah.
lot of times, if the human doesn't feel safe, they're going to do the opposite. They're going to try to control because they
Right.
don't feel safe. And that's one thing that always happens, it seems, that when people don't understand the nervous system, their solution is more pressure. And almost always that's the wrong answer.
Right. I believe we often judge horses by their action without understanding their intention. And perhaps humans do this with each other too. I have so many examples, of course, that when I do something, it's been misunderstood. I didn't mean it that way. For example, in our horse world, when a horse is entering into our space, it's not always rude and the horse wants to challenge boundaries, right? It can be a horse that is seeking connection, wanting to say hi, or a lot of times a horse that is mentally not here and just wants to go over there and kind of through you because they're not aware of you. So it's not always, it's not just a rude behavior. It can be all kinds of things. And if we, go about it as rude, I think the horse just doesn't feel understood, seen, and heard if we don't know what's actually going on. Why is the horse doing that? 20 years ago, I trained my first horse to a very high level. I could actually ride with my horse Liberty without even a neck rope in the traffic everywhere. And he followed me. And people thought, and we had a good communication, a good connection, I would say, but it was 20 years ago. And looking back, I would not train him exactly the same way I did then because something important was missing. I think he really wasn't truly feeling seen, heard, and emotionally understood. Because at that time, I didn't know anything about the horse's brain. I just been taught if the horse comes into your space, it's rude. If he's nippy and mousy, that's not tolerated. That's rude. He's not relaxed and wants to say something. And I really believe these small moments of understanding or misunderstanding slowly builds connection or you lose connection. And from an evidence-based perspective, why is it so important that horse owners understand what is actually happening inside the horse? Or in another word, why should we all understand evidence-based horse material?
I think what happens is we get so fixated on the behavior. And behavior is what we observe, but unfortunately, behavior is also what we interpret. And
Mhm.
when we interpret it, we put a label on it. So we see a behavior, we interpret it, and that could be disrespect. That could be, you know, uh, the horse is irritating. The horse is, you know, lazy. So all these are labels that we put on the behavior. But what happens long before the behavior? The nervous system state. So the nervous system state is what determines what the behavior is. The behavior is long past that nervous system state. If our horse is sympathetically aroused, a little afraid, fearful, then they're going to have defensive physiology. They can't help that. That's part of their nervous system state. So what you ask, why is my horse spooking? You know, that stupid horse. Why is my horse Lazy. Well, you could call it lazy, but perhaps the horse is overwhelmed at the moment and starting to shut down. That's a defensive physiology. So understanding that the horse is simply using what evolution has put into them and allowed them to survive for a long period to up to this modern day. Also, we're learning more and more. There's a lot of recent research that says that the brain is not just a thinking organ. In fact, it's more a predicting organ. It makes predictions. And so, if, for example, our horse predicts that this is not going to be so good, I have a sense, I don't feel comfortable, but I'm still going to go through with it. If it turns out to be a good experience for our horse, the literature calls that a prediction error. So now the horse has to go back and recalibrate, readjust its nervous system to say that wasn't bad, but I'm going to go try it again. I'm willing to try it again when this person asks. And if we go out of our way to make it a good experience for the horse, then it comes back and the prediction gets firmer. So now the horse's nervous system is actually getting more confident, for want of a better word. So we determine whether those messages are going to move towards defensive responses in our horse or safe responses in our horse. What's on the safe side? Curiosity. You have to be safe to be curious. Exploration, learning. If we are going to drill them, they can check out on us. If we're only looking at behavior, we could look at a horse standing still and say, that's good or that's bad. That horse may be checked out. That horse may have a lot of cortisol and stress in its system, or that horse may be completely comfortable. But the nervous system state is what determines that. And if we want to create a situation in which our horse can optimally learn, we want to be aware of nervous system state. And we want to be able to make all of our predictions, good predictions for the horse, because that allows them to come out of that protective shell and get more and more curious. But they need for us to set the groundwork, to open that door for them so that the learning doesn't just become repetitious. If it becomes repetitious, the horse may tune out. They start to look like a robot, and the horse is actually protecting themselves. And that's stress producing. Just because we don't see it, that creates wear and tear on the nervous system. And we don't want something that's neurologically corrosive. We want something that creates growth. Because actually, when we do that, we create more axons and neurons, more connections in the brain. We create a smarter horse if we can provide the fertile ground, emotional ground for them to do that. So who's at fault with the behavior we see? I would say we are responsible for that. And we call the horse names, but the horse's nervous system is only its nervous system. Also, we have to keep in mind the nervous system of that horse is different for every single horse, maybe even different with the same horse on different days, just like us. They're not a robot. They're not, a carousel horse carved of wood. They're a living creature. And so some days they'll be sore. Some days the wind's blowing through the trees. That creates a different startle response. Understanding where the nervous system is as communication from your horse to you, then you can say, I see that you're not comfortable today. What can we do to get comfortable so that we can learn? But if we're not going to listen and we're going to call it a bad behavior, then that somehow justifies our providing discipline. And really, that can cause confusion. That can cause your horse to start to shut down. They can become defensive. And we are the ones that started the trouble in the first place. So I would say nervous system state is something I would want everybody to be aware of. I think every time you interact with your horse, the first question you should ask is, where is their nervous system right now? The second thing you should ask is, where is my nervous system
Mhm.
right now? Because it's two nervous systems
Mhm.
interacting with one another.
Mhm. Mhm. Kind of like my principle of the start. It's you can't start communicating if you don't have a level of safety together. When the nervous system, both of the nervous system are calm, and when there's separation anxiety involved, I mean, there's all kinds of behavior coming from that, and we call it labels, but it's just a nervous system that is high aroused. And if we think the horse is being stupid or whatever, and we just move their feet and not knowing that they actually need safety, yeah, they just don't feel seen, heard, and valued. And it's just like, everybody has maybe met that person where you feel truly understood, and then you can drive and come out of your shell and you feel safe and you can be yourself. Versus when you are in a group where you don't really feel seen, heard, and valued, you kind of shut down. You're not yourself. You can't be yourself. It's kind of, you can maybe kind of describe it like that. There's so much to that to say, but and
Well,
sometimes
we
I,
could
I
talk all
say it,
day on that one subject. There is a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
of that, but we'll just let your readers have, or your listeners have a general idea,
right,
and hopefully continue to learn about the horse's nervous system, because that's where the communication actually is. That's what you're really working with. And you have two choices: work with the nervous, no, three, work with the nervous system, work against the nervous system, or guess.
right, right. Yeah, I like that. You can't not notice. It's like otherwise you just have a robotic horse. It's just not, you gotta know, you gotta know. You must know. Yeah, I would love to talk about the small steps and learning. That's a huge thing that I do in my training is break it down into very small steps because to not to overwhelm horses. And I really want the horse to give and find a yes answer so they're not getting confused, overwhelmed, or even, emotional flooding, or that we have to do too much pressure because we don't really take the small steps and break it down into small steps. I really feel small steps build confidence, emotional safety, trust, curiosity. And it really, I think they start to trust your judgment that you also know the nervous system state if they can answer that question right now, today. Maybe they've done it yesterday, but maybe they're not capable of doing it today. I just give maybe one example. There's so many examples that of the small steps we can do, but when I teach something new, I often teach a horse the last layer first. When you give a signal, like your inner energy, and then maybe use your extension of your arm, the horse really doesn't understand what the extension of your arm means. So I teach the horse that first, and it becomes a great explanation for my smaller cues. And also, when I teach something new, I break it down into little things. At first, want to get an understanding, and the release has to come right away. When I have an understanding, then I can stay in the exercise. Before, I'm not allowed to stay in the exercise when I don't have an understanding. So that's just one of so many little things I do in small steps and break it down. Can you maybe say from an evidence-based perspective why breaking learning into small achievable steps is so important?
Yeah, actually, this is a good question. Actually, there are about 10 questions in there, what you just asked me. Uh, so let's break it down into small steps. Um, the importance of small steps is that we can't expect our horse to be here uh, without laying a foundation first. And we lay the foundation because otherwise you're going to have to go back and fill in all those things you missed that your horse needed if you're going way up here first. And actually, if you're way up here, that can, it's just place where the horse can get confused, get sympathetically aroused, they lose trust, feel fearful. So in the literature, there's a phenomenon called pendulation. So in order to learn, we can't just stay homeostatic. We can't just sit on the couch and learn. So we need some challenge. But if we have too much, then we're going to go to fight or flight, or our nervous system is going to be such that we're not able to take in information. So we do that, we get a little bit of attention and we give a little bit of challenge. Now our horse is alert, they're with us, they're encoding information, but that's only one part of the process of the formula. What you have to allow then is recovery. And in the recovery phase is where the information gets consolidated. It gets input. So pendulation is up a little bit, challenge. Now let the nervous system restore. Challenge, restore. When the horse realizes that they're not at threat, they're not in danger when they're challenged. And also, challenge starts to feel good because it's at challenge when they're most alert and giving the most attention that curiosity is coming out and and they're getting the biggest dopamine hit. They're getting the highest reward when they're challenged. Like you, if something's just boring and you're learning it to learn it and you're memorizing, after a while, it doesn't have a lot of reward. But if it's challenging and you're giving it your best and you're not sure, but you get it, yes, that's your dopamine hit. If we get our horses pendulating, they get more and more comfortable with larger and larger challenges. And because it's predictable, trust gets built in. So I talked about the brain being a predictable model. If it's predictable, then you yourself are readable. You get it, your horse understands what the learning's about. And if you're readable and consistent, then you're safe because they know this, I've been through this before. I can trust in this. I can come out of my shell, my box, so to speak. And you're growing a nervous system that really, really wants to learn. You're also right in terms of the layering. If I just come out with a whip or a flag, well, let's say a whip, and I just start using it, my horse doesn't know what that's for. My horse just knows that there's pressure being applied. But if my horse understands that this is part of the learning, that this is simply an extension of the arm. This is simply a cue that I've given you before. It just blends into this. This is a better way of me giving you the cue, and they know they get the release. And there's also a little semantic uh, thing to focus on here is that we get very caught up in the release, and that's perfect. We want our timing to be right so we can wire it together that that release was right at the right time. But we also want to be aware of relief. Those are two different things. So relief, only the horse can tell us. That's not we know when the release occurred, but the relief, when did the horse feel that release is every bit as important. So getting in timing with knowing, because if your horse cannot recover, if we put so much pressure on our horse that they're having trouble recovering and coming back down, even if they do what we ask, we're asking too much.
Mhm. Can you kind of say release and relief? I have heard that in one of your podcasts and I find it really interesting. What I do is in the beginning, creating the start is to create a nervous system, kind of resetting the nervous system to where people and the horses are really deeply relaxed. I kind of call it like a box where a lot of horses are still in a state of arousal and I really have a hard time to really let go and release and lick into another yawn and really come back down all the way without asking anything, a safe place where both are totally relaxed. And then from that, if you can get that, and some horses are internal and some horses are highly aroused and have separation anxiety. And when they can create that and come all the way down without asking anything, then it's actually easier for them if they get aroused and you teach them something new to come back all the way down. If you haven't created that all the way down, they always end up here. Is that what you kind of call the relief where they are getting into a state where they are actually feeling safe and okay and not in a state where they're still not feeling okay and safe, but they got the release, but not the relief.
Sometimes we get greedy. And so we've done something with our horse and they've learned something and we want to do it again. And we want to do it again. And we get impatient with allowing them time to consolidate that information and come all the way back down. So recovery in the nervous system, if, for example, you taught your horse something really challenging and you were sure they got it, and you didn't drill it, you did it 2 times, 3 times, they understand, you understand, they got up there and they're starting to come down, that may be a point to put the horse up. That may be a point to just stand with your horse and watch them. And it may take your horse a while at first. So I often say good horsemanship is like watching the grass grow or paint dry, because only your horse can tell you where. Some horses will hold on to that tension throughout and they're ready for the next command. So we give a demand and we give a demand. And then we think we gave them a break and then we give them a demand. This is called allostatic load.
Mhm,
Al the allostatic response is your nervous system gets a demand, so it has to create energy to be able to meet that demand. If we don't allow them to come back down after providing that energy, then it builds in something called allostatic load. And if we continue to build and build, eventually over time, that is chronically stressful to the horse. That creates tremendous wear and tear on the nervous system. And you'll get some horses that
mhm,
they haven't had a chance to come all the way down, so they live right here. They
mhm,
live above homeostasis. They live with some constant stress in their system. So it's never going to hurt you to say, oh, I took too much time and my horse learned too much. You know, I allowed my horse the opportunity to learn deeply. I should not have wasted that time. If you start thinking about everything you do as a training of the nervous system, a
mhm,
neural exercise, then your horse can trust, you can get the right neurochemicals.
mhm,
But if you get so task oriented, we have to do this today, and I want you to do this, and then as soon as you learn that, learn this,
mhm,
we are at that point, we're not working with the nervous system. And what we're going to get is irritation. We're going to get defensive physiology. We're going to get where our horse might want to comply and do what we ask, because some horses will try everything in their being to meet your demand, um, but they may comply without recovery. So those are the two biggest things that a lot of trainers overlook. The pause, the dwell time, the time to allow the information to consolidate uh, is one thing. And yeah, being able to know when your horse has gotten all the way down there.
mhm,
Um, Wait for that licking and chewing. Wait for the eyes to start blinking. That's when the horse is processing what you taught them. You're taking away that processing time if you're creating a demand on top of what you've already learned. The and the more licking and chewing, the more eye blinking. Licking and chewing doesn't mean, there's all kinds of things that you hear about what licking and chewing is. What is it? Well, the ninth cranial nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve, runs down into the salivary glands. And all those fibers are parasympathetic. So sympathetic is arousal, and we need arousal to learn. We need arousal to play. Sympathetic's not bad. Parasympathetics when we're starting to come back down closer to homeostasis. When our horse is sympathetically aroused, their mouth starts to get dry and their lips start to get tight. When they come back down, those parasympathetic fibers start to fire and reactivate the salivary glands. So that's all that's happening is it's one indicator, not the only one, but one indicator that our horse is changing nervous system state from sympathetic to parasympathetic. And the reason we know is because those are all parasympathetic fibers, and all they do is lead to the salivary glands. So from this to lick and chew is a good sign for us. I oftentimes will get an engineer who sits in the front of the row and says, "Well, how long does that pause need to be? Like 1.5 minutes?" And your horse tells you. Some horses have a past history that early on, when you start to train with their nervous system, they may have a lot of trouble coming back down. And so maybe that's the number one priority. Work with the nervous system to help that horse find a way all the way back down. And then when they're able to go there, then they're able to explore. Then they're able to be curious. They know that they can get back down again and they get that release. Now they're not carrying all that defensive tension in their nervous system.
I just feel like they sometimes can't go all the way back down if they can't go all the way back down in the first place when you're not asking anything. So with a lot of rehab horses and Mustangs, I just spend time and be there and not asking anything for them to come all the way down because they will not able to come all the way down if they after a question if they're not even able to come down when I just standing there with them.
In that rehab horse, that's a little different story because in that horse, people want them to come out of their state. So that's when they put on pressure. And that's what you don't want to do because they don't feel safe. And that's why that created the trauma in the first place. What we want to do is go out of our way to create some safety so that they can engage with the world again.
Mhm.
And so we're only looking for a very small uh, amount of activity so that they can start to predict that the world's okay
Mhm.
again. So that's different than the regular horse.
Mhm.
That horse in rehab really needs our patience and may need 100 good experiences to make up for that one bad one.
I kind of feel like when I want to create a nervous system that is curious and again in a state where they can learn, I really let them say no. And that's kind of hard to understand. It's not a training, it's just somebody listening to that horse. When they feel it's too close and they say no, I step back and say, I see you. And I really feel they start to open up and get more curious. Who is that person that is actually listening for the first time to me? They start to open up, and then eventually I can go into training and ask demands and rewire the brain when they have learned pressure is just rearing or freaking out. So slowly in small steps to rewire the brain. But first, I think they sometimes really need somebody that is just listening.
Yeah. Actually, that's their self-protection uh, being activated. If we're going to ignore that, if we're going to walk over that, I like to think of the analogy of if I allow you some agency, like when you say they say no, oftentimes what they're saying is, let me step on the brake because this is a little too fast for me. I'm actually getting to a point where, I'm not sure of this, and I need a little more time to adjust. And I think of the analogy of if on a diving board you're learning to dive, if you can walk to the edge and look off, if you can on your own be able to determine, well, maybe I'll just jump first. I'll put my feet in the water, then I'll dive. But if somebody's behind me pushing, you will dive, 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 then I tense up. I may do it, but I do it out of fear. I don't feel comfortable. I'm not relaxed. I don't feel listened to. I certainly don't feel like I have a connection with the person who's pushing me off the diving board. And it's really not that different in the horse. And in fact, your horse will come to appreciate if they're telling you, they're communicating to you. They're saying, you know what? I'm feeling a little uncomfortable. I'm glad you noticed that. And and you're allowing my nervous system to adjust because we're at a fine point. We can either allow them to predict, we can give them a prediction error. They're saying, "Oh, I'm afraid." And we're saying, "You know what? Now is not at this moment is not a good time to ask you because you're starting to feel defensive. You need to feel better to do what I'm asking of you. So if I can allow you to reset and then ask in another way or ask something different or ask in a simpler step beforehand so that
Mhm.
you don't feel as rushed, as hurried, or confused, um, then I can start to send messages through different areas in the brain, actually. Because what's happening when I'm starting to have my horse feel uncomfortable, there's messages that are leaking out to a structure called the amygdala that's related to fear. And I don't want any messages going that way because my horse is going to feel like it has to protect itself. I want them all taking the normal route. An area called the thalamus sends it to the sensory system. Sensory system sends it to the motor system. Everything flows smoothly through movement, and we're good. If messages are leaking out over here to the amygdala, my horse is already feeling cautious. And I continue to just press beyond that and not listen to my horse. My horse is actually, the prediction is going to be when I'm with this person, I I have to be on guard. When I'm with this person, I have to make sure I protect myself. We'd like to take that away so the horse feels free and the horse feels open to its behaviors. So you, meaning the trainer, when you come in to work with your horse, you bring this whole environment, your whole demeanor, your whole, all your movement is communicating to the horse. Your horse is always reading you,
Mhm.
and you should, I don't want to say should, you can be reading your horse as well, and that will actually create trust. That will actually create a horse that's willing to come out of a self-defensive posture
Mhm.
and start to seek. These are horses that meet you at the gate oftentimes saying, what do we have? What do we get to do now? What are we doing today? Um, and that may sound crazy. They're not saying that to themselves, but their nervous systems have been worked with so that we are optimizing learning, we're optimizing the environment. You are in an environment. I think if people understood that, that what you bring to that interaction is not just you walking into your horse, it's your movement, it's your uh, posture,
Mhm.
it's your voice, it's everything that comes with you that allows that horse to make a good prediction. We want our horse constantly making good predictions. This is going to be safe. I'm going to be able to handle what I'm asked. I I'm going to know when I've given a yes, when I've responded in the way you want me to. I can understand your signal.
Mhm.
We haven't even gone there,
Mhm.
but that's a whole nother aspect is when
Mhm.
we demand something, that's our signal, and we don't get it, so we signal louder. Now we create all this noise, all this emotional reaction from our horse, and we decide we're going to demand even louder. When if what we did is we became concerned with all the noise. Why are you uncomfortable? What's going on with your nervous system? How can we reset? If we dampen the noise, then our signal can get very subtle. Our signal can be very soft. So it's not giving a louder signal. If you don't understand English, if I scream at you in English, that doesn't make it any easier to understand. But if I say I'm not communicating well, maybe I need to show you in motion. Maybe I need hand gestures. Maybe I need something else. And sometimes people don't want to work that hard because you do need to be creative. You do need to be reading your horse. It's not just walking out there, putting your leg over your horse, making them do all these exercises, getting off and putting them in a stall.
I'm sticking a little bit to my next question too, because it's going to be really interesting. Food reward and the inner motivation. I have worked with horses that are been heavily food trained, clicker training based. And I really want to say that I do use food sometimes. I think food reward can be important, an important tool. I just know it as a tool, a useful tool, depending on the horse, the situation. I need it or I don't need it. But I really, really always want to move beyond food as a goal, no matter what horse. As I mentioned in the beginning, I don't want the horse simply to perform a task. Receiving a food, I would love to have a partner that is deeply motivated to learn and engage from the inside out, just like the super learner, like you are. You're deeply passionate about how horses think and learn. Other people are passionate about other things, and that really is a drive that comes from the inside out, and we don't do it for to get a treat. I'm gonna give you a cake if you're gonna learn, if you're gonna read that book, Steve. You're not doing it because of the cake. You're doing it because you really deeply inside you want to learn. And I feel we can create horses that really want to be a super learner and be with us. I kind of lost track there because I want to
That's
talk
okay.
about food, but I feel sometimes that food can overshadow some fear. I know horses are not going to eat treats if they're really fearful, but I have seen horses that go into trailer because they know they get food inside and get treats, but maybe even 5 years later, they're not going to go into the trailer because they don't really seek that food right now, and then they feel I have never learned what the queue forward means. I have never learned what the ramp is. It's scary, it's wobbling. I've never actually been okay being tied up alone. All these ingredients also had horses that you can catch, Mustangs that you can put on a halter with the food reward, knowing they get food. But they were afraid of me approaching them if I don't have food. They were afraid of me touching their head when I put on the halter. When you had food, they were okay. They kind of seemed okay, but they were not. Can you say that food reward sometimes can overshadow some of the fear?
Yes. Um, that happens quite often. Now, I don't want people listening to say, I'm just waiting for Dr. Peters to say, positive reinforcement
No.
is good and negative reinforcement is bad, or the other one, because like Republicans and Democrats, I want to know where he is. So if he doesn't tell this right, I'm not going to listen to him anymore. So what I'm saying is that both work. The negative reinforcement and the positive reinforcement, they both work. And there is certainly reason to do either one.
Mhm.
And you may become comfortable working with either one. Um, and believe it or not, like you have done, you can do both.
Mhm.
You're also right in that one represents an intrinsic reward, finding the dopamine through curiosity, through learning, and the other is an extrinsic reward. It's given from the outside. And you're also right in that if my horse learns to look down at the trailer, put its head down, and have binocular vision. Okay, now I'm going to step up into the trailer. And now we're getting into the trailer. And I don't feel comfortable, but I'm not restrained. I'm allowed to get back out again. So there's all this testing back and forth that's going on as the horse learns to eventually settle in the trailer. You could end up with a situation. I'm feeding you in the trailer. That horse really wants that food. It gets onto the trailer, eats the food, but doesn't learn to self-regulate.
Mhm.
So they
Mhm.
don't learn how to come down as a result. So when one horse who's had that opportunity to learn comes off the trailer, they've been on so many times, they self-regulate and they're calm on the trailer and they're calm when they come off. And there's others you can hide that underneath there. They get on the trailer, sure they get on the trailer and they tolerate it. And they may even look okay when they come off the trailer, but they're here. They're not there. And so when you put something else on top of that, more pressure, then sometimes they really become sympathetically aroused. And then if they're always looking for that external reward, you're right. If I use this example often. So if people are listening and they've heard this repeated, but if I want my children to learn to read, and I go over Charles Dickens with one of my children, and they read the first chapter, and we talk about it together. And what do you think's going to happen? What was going on with these characters? And then we read chapter two, and now they're starting to follow the narrative. Uh, they may even read chapter three without me. They might say, "Well, I couldn't wait for you, Dad, because I really wanted to learn about this book." Another child, I might say, if you read this ch book with me, you read chapter one, I'll give you $5. Now we're going to read chapter two. Great, we read chapter two, and you get another $5. At some point, if I say I ran out of money, it wouldn't matter to the child who's intrinsically learned to the excitement of reading for reading's sake. It would be a little different if I just stopped the reward with a child who is reading. Well, why should I read that book? I'm not getting any money out of it anymore. That may be simplifying it somewhat, but dopamine is the most rewarding neurochemical in us, in our horse. If you're addicted to crack cocaine, you're not addicted to crack cocaine. You're addicted to the dopamine release in your brain. So, if I can teach my horse to self-regulate, if I can teach my horse to try to seek out the dopamine that's already in them, then it's not one step removed. It's not coming from the outside. It's coming internally.
Mhm.
And so you can work with both. Sometimes trust, it takes a long time and you feel like you're getting nowhere. Food is a powerful motivator, and
Mhm.
you can, everybody's a scientist. I would encourage you to go out and do what you're comfortable with. And sometimes clicker training works because it's immediate. Sometimes it's hard to get food there as a reward immediately. So it's tricky with timing as well. Um, but what I would say that they both work, they work a little differently in the nervous system, and you can experiment with either one. But certainly, you can hide fear behind food uh, and think that because your horse did the behavior, food treats shape the behavior.
Mhm.
That's what they do. They shape behavior. You know, that's how behaviorists use them. If we're looking at nervous system state, we're long before the behavior starts. So if we're learning to work with the nervous system state, we could do that with food, but we're shaping the brain instead of shaping the behavior. The behavior we will shape by shaping the brain, but if we're just so focused on shaping the behavior, we can forget about the nervous system state. And sometimes that nervous system state is not where we want it to be, even though we're getting the behavior.
Mhm.
I'm not
Despite
sure how clear I was.
no, you were. Despite of
Okay.
clicker training or not, I think we all um, have to respect each other's way of training. I think I just want to point out that we're always a beginner on our level, and that drives me to keep learning. And there's we can learn from each other so much and from everybody. And then at the end, we have our way of training, but it doesn't mean that the other way is bad. It's just different, and we can all learn from each other. Just want to say that.
I
But
think if the bottom line is that we're going to listen to our horse, we're going to try to understand our horse, and ultimately we want to be kind. So if your training falls into those uh, into that milieu, then you're going to do right by your horse. If you just took a horse and said, I'm going to go out of my way that every day I do something with my horse, I'm going to try to make sure it's a good day for my horse. If you started stacking up just all the good days, you'd have an incredible horse that could do all kinds of things because they'd feel safe, because we made it a good day. So their prediction, now we know brains are predictive. Their prediction is this is going to be a good day. then we're in good shape.
Mhm. Can you maybe talk really quick about the intrinsic motivation in a horse? I know you have talked about that in some other podcasts. I thought it you mentioned some couple words that that deep passion that comes from inside the horse with
Yeah.
intrinsic motivation.
Um, Real quickly, basically, there's an internal locus of control. That's what we call agency. There's something in if somebody wanted to look it up, the five domains that we now look at, the scientists look at the things that need to be in place for the horse's mental health and overall health. Um, but an intrinsic locus of control means I have agency. I have some choice in my world. What my behavior matters. And even if it's just in training, if if your horse understands and feels almost like they're training you, where I know how to make that human's leg come off me, all I have to do is do this. I've done it 3 times and the leg comes off. So they feel like their behavior matters. An external locus of control is I'll make my horse do this. I don't care what my horse thinks. And horses begin to shut down with that external locus of control when they're forced to do something. And if you do that too much, that's what leads to learned helplessness, where horses begin to think, my behavior doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what I do. I can't escape this. I have no choice here. So that is actually their nervous system starts to shut down. Their immune system actually is compromised.
Mhm.
What we do is we turn on the stress valve, not full blast, where you can see it, where they go through the ceiling. But if we don't allow them some internal locus of control, that's stressful, always being told what to do, we'll have constant cortisol
Mhm.
leaking into the system, and that becomes neurologically corrosive. In other words, um, their nervous system starts to deteriorate and their brains shrink.
Mhm.
Brains will shrink under stress. So if we have too much of an external locus of control, we don't allow the brain the opportunity to have uh, meaningful interaction with the world, then what happens is they start to shrink. So I would put it right back on the human. Do you want a
Mhm.
horse that's brain is flourishing with a lot of options, or do you want to shrink it down and continue to demand, get a robotic horse, but get a horse that actually, welfare wise, is in a bad situation?
Mhm. It's really our responsibility.
It is. It's not like the nervous system is out here and then we have dressage and we have, Western pleasure and we have this. You're working with the same nervous system.
Mhm.
So you can work towards the horse's welfare. And everything we've talked about here this afternoon applies to your horse because every horse has a brain. And I think in terms of social license, we're starting to look at, and there's wearable technology now that we're starting to see what's going on in the horse's nervous system, and they're going to tell on us. And people are going to lose their sport. They may not believe me right now, but racetracks are shutting down. We're stopping some sports in the Olympics. Dressage is under the microscope. All we have to do, because our horses will be tremendous performers, is listen to their nervous system.
Mhm. I really encourage people. I'm going to put down your website when I share this video so people can look you up. You give clinics, you have books. I know you don't make enough commercial. You're not that type of person to kind of say, "Hey, buy my book," but I'm going to do it for you because I think it's just something people have to know and read about. And I'm going to put down the link so people can find you and learn from
Well,
you.
thank you. Thank you very much. If you go to Amazon, you can look up the books and they were written for you. So I hope they're helpful in giving you a different lens at looking at your horse. And even my neuro poetry book was written so that those poems can teach you about the nervous system uh, and in your horse. I write about learned helplessness, but in a poem, so you can feel. the nervous system instead of read a lot of science and jargon. Even I don't want to read a lot of science and jargon. So,
Yeah, that's what I really like about you is you can really say it in words that we understand because everyone is a little scientist if if we listen to our horse, but still we don't really know those special words, and you can really break it down so everyone can actually
science is for you.
understand.
Science should be for everyone to inform everyone so that we can be the best that we can be. And that's my hope.
Thank you so much,
Oh,
Steve.
it's been
Thank you
my
for your
pleasure
time.
speaking with you. Thank you very much.